For specific content warnings and the link to the written version of this story, please check the description. This week's story is based on Sing a Song of Sixpence from Gammer, Gurton's Garland or the Nursery Parnassus, 1784, and is titled A Dainty Dish. The gold coins rained from the king's hand as he settled back in his chair. His Majesty planted his boots on the desk with a crash as the gold coins danced and twirled about him. A maid waddled in, pushing a serving cart which displayed a substantial pie. "Well?" The king leaned in closer. "Isn't that a dainty dish to set before your king?" His Majesty gave a hearty laugh as he withdrew his feet from the desk and pushed his pile of gold aside with the back of his right hand. The maid lifted the pastry with her legs and shuffled over to the desk, slamming it down onto the surface. "And who should I thank for such a homely gift?" The king laughed as the maid wiped the sweat from her brow with her handkerchief. "Why, they didn't say, Your Majesty. It were just stout and Yule." The king stared down at the pie with scepticism. "It's not poisoned, is it?" he half joked as the maid shook her head. "Fetch me a knife, then, Stella." Stella, the maid, placed a hand to her chest, stunned that the king remembered her name. Remembering the task set before her, she clambered to the serving cart and picked up a large knife. She brought the knife over to the king, and on his word she sliced through the flaky pastry, which fluttered here and there. A screech could be heard from within the pie. The king and the maid glanced down in confusion as they observed a sharp yellow beak force itself through. Moments later, over 24 black birds tore through the crust and filled the room. They flapped their wings with fury as they crashed about the room. As soon as one locked eyes on the king, it was done, and after it all, the king and Stella were left behind in a bloody mess as the birds broke through the windows and freed themselves. The queen stirred her tea with a small silver teaspoon. "You suspect I had my husband slain?" She pulled out the spoon and side-eyed the royal guard standing feet away. "Where were you during the time of the king's death, Your Majesty?" The queen had a quiet sip of tea before setting her cup down onto the table before her. "I was in the parlour, eating bread and honey. I have a sweet tooth, you see." The queen showed off her gleaming white teeth, which merely furthered the guard's suspicions. Why would someone who enjoys sweet things have such perfect teeth? "Perhaps you called for the cook to bake the pie?" It was less of a question and more of an allegation. "Why would I do that?" The queen leaned back, intrigued. "I think you expected by murdering your husband his kingdom would fall to you. Seeing as you have no heir." The guard inched forward, ready to arrest the queen. Her Highness lifted her palm as a signal for him to hold. The guard did so. "Upon the death of my husband, the crown falls to his brother, Prince Cole, does it not?" The guard stepped back amazed. "Why, if you knew this, why would you have your husband killed?" The queen raised an eyebrow and again lifted her cup. "Why would I indeed?" She took another sip. It wasn't long before all allegations against the queen were dropped, and they found a new suspect. Another of the king's maids was discovered to have been one of the king's many mistresses, and so it wasn't out of the realm of possibility for her to be the culpable party. "I hereby arrest you for the murder of the king," the guard stated, motioning for more guards to apprehend the young woman. "You mean the death of the king and his maid, of which I am guilty of neither." The maid struggled against her captors. "I fail to see how the death of a servant is worthy of note." The guard rolled his eyes as he watched the poor woman be dragged out of view. "Poppycock!" the maid shouted back. "A death is a death, no matter the rank of the person who has died." The woman disappeared out of sight. The guard followed behind and motioned for the doors to be closed behind him. The dungeon was dingy and damp. No light entered save for a couple of flickering torches that garnered the wall. Luce, the maid, had been shackled to the wall of a cell, listening weakly as the royal guard told her his rendition of events. "You claim you were hanging out clothes in the garden." Luce glanced up at the looming unpleasant man. "Yes, for the 100th time, yes! I have nothing to do with the death of the king or my—" The guard cut her off. "Do fowl live in the gardens?" he challenged. "Of course they do," Luce spat back. "Thus, it's feasible you had access to, let's say, I don't know, 24 blackbirds?" Luce slid onto the heavy ground. What was the use? She was a servant, and this man had already decided about her. "You are to be executed at sunrise tomorrow on grounds of treason. Since our new king is yet to have arrived, I shall oversee the event. Don't be late." The man grinned as he sauntered away, accompanied by two guards that pulled the torches from the wall, plunging Luce into darkness. Tap, tap, tap. Footsteps carried themselves down the long, damp hall. They stirred Luce out of her slumber. "Who's there?" she whispered to the dark, as the click of her cell's lock could be heard snapping open. "Is it not ample that I am to be beheaded come dawn?" she cried, scanning the emptiness for the invader. Luce was freed from the irons that clutched her wrists, and her tired arms dropped to the ground. A hand hiding in the dark reached out to her, and it took little convincing for Luce to follow it out of the cage. The moonlight drenched the hooded figure, but Luce wasn't focused on them. She was soaking up the feel of freedom on her skin. It was cold. It was, after all, still night, but it was nevertheless freedom all the same. Luce twirled a dozen times before falling to the grass and rolling in its cool embrace. Joy. A slight giggle tore the woman from her euphoric state. Luce clambered to her feet and looked upon the person who had saved her. Two hands pushed out of the two long silken sleeves and found themselves pulling down the hood of the mysterious figure, revealing the face of the queen. Luce was quick to curtsy. "There's no need for that." The queen cleared her throat, leaving Luce unsure of what to do next. "Do you see me wearing a crown?" the queen asked as Luce found her feet again and composed herself. "No, your majesty." The queen tightened her face in displeasure. "Please, there's no need for formalities. Out here I'm not your queen." Luce raised an eyebrow. "Do you know my name?" the woman asked Luce, who replied with, "Luna?" Luna nodded. "That's right. Luna. My parents chose it for a reason. Do you know it?" Luce shook her head. "Before I was even born, they had decided my fate. I was to marry the handsome young Prince Soleil, heir to the throne. My name was to be the perfect counterpart to his, the moon to his sun. Growing up, they always reminded me of my place. I was born to be a queen." Luce studied Luna's face as it became unreadable. "Did you love him?" Luna asked, almost too quiet to hear. Luce shifted on her feet. I didn't, but I think my sister did." Luna was curious now. "Your sister?" Luce responded with a sigh. "Stella, she was—" A lump caught in her throat. "The maid who died alongside my husband." Luna closed her eyes. "I'm sorry, Luce, but I never arranged for it to go the way it did." Luce stepped back, away, unsure what Luna was going to say, but sensing it was something she wouldn't like. "I killed my husband," Luce gasped. "You murdered my sister!" The reality dawned on her. "I only planned the death of my husband. I snuck grain in his pocket, hoping the birds would sense it. I suppose they got a bit too hungry." Luce let out a wail. I didn't mean for this to happen. I was just so tired, so angry. You know he was plotting to have me assassinated. Luce wiped her tears aside of the back of her thumb. She closed her eyes and nodded. You did? Luna gasped. He told me he said I would be his next queen. Luce whimpered and fell to her knees. Luna knelt down to comfort her. The two women sat with their backs against a stone wall, leaning on each other's shoulder. They had been there for hours, in silence, in mourning. I never wanted any of this. Luna was the first to speak up. I thought by offering the king I would make a statement, tearing down the monarchy. That is, until I realised he had a brother, of course. Soleil and Cole. Luce giggled. Luna pushed away from her, confused. The other servants, when they heard the news Prince Cole was on his way, they were singing. Luna tilted her head, intrigued. Old King Cole is the brother of Soul, the brother of Soul is he. She burst into laughter. Luna couldn't help but join in. You're not pronouncing his name right. Luce looked Luna in the eyes with the most serious look she could muster. That's a joke, she replied before both women were again bowled over in amusement. What are you going to do now? Luce inquired. Well, no matter where I travel, they will pursue me. That's what they do, you see. They'd never allow for the queen to just abandon her post without a good hunt. I'm just property to them. Luce squeezed her new friend's hands. I suppose I'll get in a boat and sail the many seas. Anywhere away from here, she beamed as the early morning breeze ran itself through her hair. You know, Luna turned to face Luce, we are both outlaws now. How about we run off together? Luce looked up to the stars and grinned. I think I'd like that. I know wherever I run, she will be with me. Luna followed Luce's gaze to a star just larger than the rest, flicker when it knew it was being watched. I believe you're right. Luna got to her feet and helped guide Luce up. I wholeheartedly do. For more stories like this, please be sure to hit subscribe down below and hit the bell icon for notifications of when I release a new story. Also, follow me on my Wattpad.